After this panel is over, we'll have a final sort of keynote from Stephen Ritz, and he'll really end the panel, or end the summit, with some inspiration. So it's now my pleasure to introduce George Naylor to keynote the Farmers Leading the Food Movement panel. I'm really excited about this panel because family farmers are producing at least 70% of the world's food, but are rarely recognized for their contributions as businessmen and women, innovators and entrepreneurs, and as stewards of the land, as we've heard throughout the last couple of days. George is actually someone who has had all of those kind of roles. He is an expert on agroecological farming and has raised non-GMO corn and soy on his family farm in Iowa since 1976. He was a member of then-Governor Tom Vilsack's Ag Task Force and Water Summit. Currently, he is a member of the board of the Center for Food Safety and a former president of the National Family Farm Coalition. Following George's remarks, Jason Huffman from POLITICO will be moderating the panel. Again, use the hashtag #FoodTank. Please join me now in welcoming George to the stage.
Whoa. Let's see here. Sorry. I think this has got to be. Well, maybe it'll work that way. Will it work? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, it's an honor and privilege to be here and speak at the Food Tank Summit. I've been a farmer and farm activist for 40 years, raising only non-GMO corn and soybeans on my family farm near Sheridan, Iowa. And I'm transitioning half of my farm now to organic and starting an organic cider orchard. And I'm getting help from my partner, Patty Edwardson, who also sells fruits and vegetables at the Greene County Farmers Market. Now, I'm not a prolific writer or speaker, but I try to be the typical farmer of being a jack of all trades. So I would recommend that you look at my chapter in the book called Food Movements Unite, which is published by Food First. The name of the chapter is, Without Clarity on Parity, All You Get Is Charity. And of course, I would recommend you read some sections in Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, where I'm featured as the corn and soybean farmer. And I've known so many wonderful people trying to rectify our food systems through the year, where they really try to make words like healthy food, family farmer, conservation actually mean something concretely. And then, of course, I've been thrilled by so much of the energy and leadership from modern family farmers, grassroots farmers, just like their ancestors, trying to change policy or trying to develop new markets to stay in business. We always need more family farmers as leaders. If they don't speak up and tell the story of the family farmer and organize themselves, who will? Unfortunately, there's been a lot of theories, really, that seem to be aiming at to change our food and agricultural systems for the better, but in fact, we're not. These theories may have seemed logical, but in fact, they supported the status quo, where questions were really boiled down to what's best for the individual, sometimes including corporations. And of course, they would say that what they were saying was going to be good for us all, and especially for poor people, and they had researchers to back up what they had to say with science. So I've learned in my 40 years of farming and farm activism that we need everybody and their ideas and actions to be part of the puzzle. But most importantly, we need to be part of the same puzzle. The puzzle for a democratic, egalitarian social change that respects our ecological limits, rather than the puzzle that intentionally or unintentionally supports the industrial status quo that only creates more and more problems for our democracy, our health, our society, and our environment. When I had the privilege of representing the National Family Farm Coalition at meetings or trade agreement protests, the international movement of farmers and peasants and farm workers and fishers called La Via Campesina, I would jokingly say that I came from the future. I would describe the situation in my community, and of course, they would be surprised. First of all, they thought, well, family farmers should own their own land, when that's just not true in Iowa. The average family farmer owns about 10% of their land. We have almost no farmers remaining. Our rural communities have become run-down rural ghettos. We have an incredible loss of biodiversity. And, of course, we have soil erosion and incredible water pollution. It's really become a virtual silent spring. Farmers in other countries were being told by their governments, well, the problem is you're only farming a few hectares or whatever, a few acres. Your problem is you're just not big enough. Well, they were being told to get bigger, go in debt, buy the latest chemicals and seed and machinery, invest in new export crops, and rent or buy more land. And if not, well, then just get out of farming and move to the city. Well, being from the future, I could tell them that that recipe was a complete failure in the United States and explained exactly the kind of situation I explained that I was experiencing back home. And you might be surprised that even though many of my neighbors farm thousands of acres, the bankers are telling them this is their last year of farming. There will be no loans to put in the next crop. In fact, the next farm foreclosure crisis has already started. So farmers through the years have thought that getting bigger would be the answers if they could survive. And I had a neighbor who'd point to his empty silo. When we have a lot of empty silos around, he would always say, "There's my monument to stupidity." Now, most of all the cattle and hogs are, and dairy and chickens are all owned by corporations. And they're in giant feedlots, and confined animal feeding operations are CAFOs. So now our local farm communities are inundated with this manure and stink. And of course we have fence-row corn and soybean farming, which adds more to the nutrient load of our streams and rivers. And so getting bigger, no matter how small a farmer is or how big they are, is clearly not the answer to a farmer's problems. When a big farmer goes broke, I often hear the sentiment, well, do you really feel sorry for them? They brought it on themselves. And my answer is to that, well, we should feel sorry for ourselves for losing one of our most precious institutions, the family farm. Farm depressions are not going to reverse farm consolidation. The land will continue to be farmed, but by some other farmer who pushes the pencil to try to figure out how to get bigger. In some cases, corporations are already doing the farming, and we are headed towards a time of farming without farmers, where the bottom line drives every decision. So today I take my hat off to all the farmers we still have, excuse me, small or large, produce or commodity farmers, and those many young people who know there should be a place for them on the land producing healthy food for our people while taking care of Mother Earth. But sentimentality and public campaign lines like "I love farmers" won't be of much help either. There have been so many agribusiness wolves in sheep's clothing with their ideas that are usually from front groups like the National Pork Producers Association, the Soybean Association, the Corn Growers Association, who all claim to represent farmers but really represent the industry. And we better be thankful for those farmers that are defying the odds by farming agroecologically or organically, that are preserving and developing new methods and techniques that we will all need when our society recognizes that we can provide healthy food and leave a beautiful planet for future generations. I've been told I have less time to speak than I thought, so I'm going to have to cut a few things out here. So this, I think, is what we face. The issues are not healthy food, water pollution, or decimated rural communities, etc., etc., etc. It's commodities, stupid. That means we need to decommoditize food, whether by policy or developing local markets like many of the farmers here today. I believe unless we recognize that industrialized agriculture depends on the production and consumption of commodities, and that our most basic assumptions of economic behavior actually assure the industrial status quo, the big problems I mentioned will never be solved, and we'll be wringing our hands at future summits, much like I've done for the last 40 years. The logic of commodity consumption and production is at the root of most of our environmental and social problems. How many of our citizens think that it's great now we're only paying $2 a gallon for gasoline instead of $4 a gallon? I'd say a pretty big percentage. Okay, and so then our politicians say, oh, well, we want cheap gas, and we should be happy about the oil giants fracking and drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Whatever Chevron wants, Chevron gets. Any policy that would drive up the price of energy or place a tax on carbon would hurt poor people. Forget climate change. Drill, baby, drill. Well, the same illogic applies to our food supply. We go into the grocery store thinking we're going to buy our food most economically, and the corporations like Monsanto say, well, we should be grateful for them creating chemicals and drugs and hormones to make our food more affordable. And thanks to the corporate media, the real costs are out of sight and out of mind. So by thinking that cheaper is better, we are unconsciously cooperating with the policy that guarantees our own demise. And then there's the public relations campaigns by this industrial food and agriculture complex. The latest version is what Jonathan Latham, in his eloquent Independent Science News article, which is called How the Great Food War Will Be Won, he calls their campaign the Golden Fact. This is the claim that only industrial agriculture with more and more technologies, including those that are needed to fix the problems that are already caused by the technology we use, is the only way we can feed a global population of 9 or 10 billion people in 2050.
That might be a good point to end on, George.
And is that like 5 minutes or 7? No, that is not the end of the sentence story here. It seemed like that's a lot less than 10.
There's a timer right there. We're on 0.
It's 0. And it started out at 10?
It did, sir. But you were very heartfelt. Do you want to give you a couple of sentences to sum up?
Okay. Well, rather than the system we have where every farmer must try to raise as much as they can, what we need is a quota system through a farm bill, the next farm bill, based on parity, so that then when a farmer is told, oh, you can produce 10,000 acres on your farm, they're going to think, okay, how do I produce 10,000 bushels of corn? How can I produce that 10,000 bushels with the least amount of chemicals, the least amount of fertilizer, and the most amount of conservation? So in closing, that's what we need is parity, and you read in my chapter in the book, you can read about how we can go from this kind of agriculture to the one that we all want. And finally, I'd like to leave some wisdom for the farmers that are going to be leading the farm movement. As my dad said, farming is the best occupation that you can choose. And secondly, from the author Edward Abbey, he said, do not burn yourselves out. Be as I am, a reluctant enthusiast, a part-time crusader, a half-hearted fanatic. Save the other half of yourselves and your lives for pleasure and adventure. It's not enough to fight for the land. It is even more important to enjoy it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, Jason Huffman, POLITICO.
Hello, everyone. How y'all doing? I'm in Virginia. I got to say, how y'all doing? I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so I've adopted that speech pattern. It's really a privilege to be here. I was at last year's Food Summit, Food Tank Conference, and it was an incredible thrill. And it was so exciting to see the organization that I knew for just a short period of time put on such a polished show. And it looks like this year they've even topped last year's show, so it looks really great. I congratulate Danielle and everybody on the team. It looks really good. I got a question for you. Who has the best job in Washington? Anyone? Right. I do. I have a really cool job. I edit Politico Pro's ag and trade verticals. We have about 7 reporters and a deputy editor, and we get into the policies and legislation, regulation in these 2 exciting areas. When I first started working in food policy a couple of years back, writing about it, editing stories on it, I was with Food Chemical News. And I had done a couple other issues, bank regulation, telecom, home health care, all kinds of variety. I was a newspaper reporter at one point or another. This is it. I'm never leaving. This is too interesting. Food is the largest industry in the world. It's complex. It's got some of the craziest regulations and rules and laws, and they're all different depending on what state, country you're in. Big trade issues. Food is not. When you go to buy an ingredient, you don't just buy it from the U.S. It comes from everywhere. So it's a really complicated but interesting area. And when you go to a party, you can talk about it. When I was covering bank regulation, I wasn't as much fun at parties. So, but the issue we're going to get into today, we're talking about the farmers leading the food movement. And I thought about that expression, the food movement, because in my world, the food movement could refer to a lot of different things. Are we talking about sustainable agriculture, which I know is food tanks, one of their biggest issues? We're talking about organic farming. Are we talking about animal welfare? I think we're talking about all of these issues that consumers now really care a lot about. When I was at Food Chemical News back in 2008, there was interest in sustainability. It wasn't. It was kind of a buzzy thing to talk about, but we weren't seeing a lot of policy action in that area. But I think what we're starting to see is things kind of crank up and move in the direction that we're going to start seeing more efforts to move policy on these issues. So this is my area of focus, policy. I know that's not the only way to change things, but I think it's going to be. I think we're going to see a lot of action on the Hill and around the country in the near future on this subject. So anyhow, I want to get started. I'm going to start by just throwing out some questions to the audience. To the panel. And then when we finish with the panel, we're going to turn to the audience. We're going to ask you to interject and ask questions and participate in the conversation. I'm going to ask, as I go to each panel member, I'm going to ask them to talk a little bit about themselves so you get a sense of where they're coming from on these issues, and hopefully give a little perspective. So I'm going to start. I'll pick somebody. I'll start with Regina.
It's my red shirt, right?
Yeah. My eyes went right to the red shirt.
There
Sorry. You go. What do you think is the single biggest challenge you face as a result of food policies?
Well, I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Regina Beidler. When I introduce our family, I usually say farming skipped a generation. We both my husband Brent and I, had grandparents who farmed, but not parents who farmed. Brent particularly had a lifelong interest from a very young age in being a farmer, but there's all those challenges of how do you go about becoming a farmer when you don't have a family farm to come back to. And there was 2 things that really helped us dramatically, and I think this will touch a bit on your question as well. The first was that we were able to come to organic production, and specifically to grazing, which is a real centerpiece of organic production. When you're looking at buying a farm as a young person, you not only have the farm to purchase, you have animals, you have equipment infrastructure, you have to know how to do everything, and you have to find a market that's willing to take your product. And so with us, we were looking at grazing being a way that was a great thing for our animals, and at the same time reduced how much equipment we needed to have, because the cows are out harvesting their own feed, depositing their own manure. It took some of that burden off of us. And in Vermont, there was a real movement afoot around grazing, thanks to people like Bill Murphy, who was a real advocate of grazing in the state. Organic production was really important too. When we were coming to our farm, we knew that we wanted to be organic farmers. We started transitioning our farm immediately. And as we were finishing our transition, we looked for a marketplace. Organic Valley was coming to Vermont about that time, looking for farmers primarily to supply milk to Stonyfield for their yogurt at that time. And we were really drawn to the cooperative structure. It was a co-op that began with three things. It was going to be a cooperative. It was going to be, which means the farmers own the business, so have some decision-making power and some democratic process. That farmers were going to be paid a fair price for the food that they were producing, and that farmers were paid first. So even today, farmers are paid first, and the business runs on what's left over. And how many businesses do you know who work that way? So this past year, 56% of all the money that Organic Valley owned went back first to the farmers, and the business ran on the rest. So I think for challenges for beginning farmers, those were some of the challenges, but again, some opportunities that worked out really well for us.
Ben, you and I connected because this is a really weird thing. When you're talking to someone and they say they're from Adams County, Pennsylvania, because nobody else is from Adams County, Pennsylvania. I'm from Adams County, Pennsylvania. He is from Adams County, Pennsylvania. And we could have taken over. We did a little conference call before we did this panel, and I thought we were going to take over the entire call when I learned this. But Ben, you're a seventh-generation farmer.
Yeah.
So you probably, your family collectively has probably seen a lot of changes, a lot of challenges have come at your family. What do you think today is the biggest challenge for your business from the policy side?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to the folks here at Food Tank for inviting me to speak. Again, my family is from Adams County. We grow a variety of tree fruits and vegetables and do a number of farmers markets. A few here in D.C. and also Philadelphia and in our local central Pennsylvania area. And as far as policy things that we've noticed change over the years, the first thing that really comes to mind, and especially in recent years with the FSMA regulations, that a lot of the food safety regulations they feel, especially in something like tree fruit, which generally speaking hasn't been the target of as many food outbreaks, luckily, fortunately, that it really starts to become kind of cumbersome on a small to medium-sized farm in our area. And in a lot of ways, I know a few folks have spoken about scaling up farms and small family farms providing more food. It can really be kind of prohibitive, just because a lot of larger farms and corporate farms are able to hire somebody who can oversee all of that for the whole of the operation. And meanwhile, on our farm, my uncle takes a lot of the lead on it, and my dad and I are kind of like the support staff to help him get everything ready for our food safety audits each year. And and the way we've grown our business through selling directly to the public, it makes me nervous as a young person in agriculture to think of a day where I can't sell to my neighbor, a bushel of apples or a pint of cider or something like that. It's that would completely. I can't think of what a world like that would be, but it seems like we could be headed in that direction. So I'm really hopeful that those kind of considerations are taken into consideration, like going forward in food policy. That's certainly a big part of it, and I think that certainly immigration and access to agricultural labor are a big part of it too. Those are the two most daunting things that I think our families
Do you see yourself having to employ someone as a result of the Food Safety Modernization Act to monitor regulation and keep you guys in compliance?
What I see is unfortunately, sometimes me and my uncle and my father, the three of us are owners together. We end up training people to take on a lot of our responsibilities, which is the part of my job that I really love, which is farming. And because these regulations are in place and the buck stops with us, we have to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. And so it means a lot more time taken away from farming, passing those important on-the-farm decisions onto people who are capable, but they're never going to do it the same way that I will or my father or my uncle will. But it's division of labor, and then adding employees to do our job and making our job more regulatory.
How many employees do you have on your operation?
It varies seasonally. Right now, I think we're kind of at that 22 full-time folks on payroll.
All in Adams County?
All in Adams County. Yep, and
On how many acres?
450 acres farming right now.
Shepard, have you had a chance to talk about FSMA at all? Are you familiar with FSMA?
I'm familiar with FSMA only from, I was an organic vegetable farmer in Vermont, and then I went into the seed business, and then I ended up going out and getting various jobs, one of which was at Rodale, working for a new farm. And that was when I became aware of FSMA, because my job there was actually to do economic modeling.
Yeah.
And I really think that there's a double standard with things like that, where you'll hear the larger producers and processors complain bitterly about government regulation, when actually the government regulation benefits them for the reason that Ben just said, because it forces scale, and they're the ones that have the scale. So they're really sort of talking out both sides of their mouth. Personally, I've always been an organic grower. My grandfather was an organic grower, and neither my grandfather nor I was ever certified organic vegetable production, because we didn't need to be, because we lived in a community where everyone could see what we were doing and knew what we were doing. And the real key is that when you scale up and you try and replace the industrial food supply, you have no choice but to develop these methodologies to certify what's being done. I mean, it forces to scale. And you either decide that you want to have a small artisanal agriculture, or you want to replace the American food system. And each of those has implications. And it's not that I'm saying one is better than the other, but they each have their implications, and you might as well not hide from those implications. I see some people here in the audience who know the intimate details of trying to make this work. So is that enough of an answer?
Yeah, that's good.
Was that too evasive?
No, I think you got it. Paul, you're in a different universe of the food galaxy, or did I mix up universe and galaxy? I don't know. Okay. But talk a little bit about some of the policies that you see in your world. Talk about a little bit where you are and what you do, and then about some of the policies you see in the world that maybe companies struggle with.
Okay, I'm Paul Willis, and I live in Thornton, Iowa, and I had a farm, a conventional farm, raising corn, soybeans, and I was raising outdoor pasture-raised pigs. And what happened and what has been happening in the Midwest, first I guess it kind of started in North Carolina. Industrial livestock production started moving in on us in over the 80s and the 90s and so on. And there were less and less pigs really being raised the way I was doing it. And I saw a chicken in the grocery store, free-range chicken, and I'm thinking, why not free-range pigs? You know, there shouldn't, maybe there's a market. And so I looked around for a while. Eventually, I met Bill Niman, and I sent some pork to San Francisco, and it went around to some of the restaurants there. People loved it, and we had to figure out at that point, how does a live animal get from Iowa to the West Coast? So I figured that out, and this was in 1995, and at that time I shipped 30 pigs. That was the beginning, or I was really the founder of the Niman Ranch Pork Company, which is part of Niman Ranch, which also is beef and lamb. But anyway, I continued, and at that time I was raising about 3,000 pigs a year, and we were being squeezed out of the market by the industrial commodity market, and so it was really the first time somebody asked me what I wanted for my pigs. I knew at that point I wasn't in the commodity market anymore, and you had an opportunity to really put a value on what you were doing, you know. And so we came to a conclusion, and it was a fair price for what I was doing and so on. And that was the beginning of what we have today, which is a network. Let me just say, we started adding other farmers and started writing the standards for how we were raising our livestock and pigs in particular, which was well, in my case, I wanted to distance myself as far as possible from the commodity world, and so that animal welfare, of course, was a big part of it, how the animals were raised. Eventually, we went to no antibiotics, no meat products, and so on, and then looking for other farmers. But anyway, today, the network of Niman Ranch farmers and ranchers are 700 plus. And
how many hogs?
How many hogs do they all have?
Yeah.
Thousands. Our supply chain is about 3,000 hogs a week.
Okay.
So even though Niman Ranch is as well known as a brand, and that was part of it, is create a national brand, it's fairly well known and so on. People think it's bigger than it is, but the hog kill in the United States is about 400,000 a day, and we're 3,000 a week. So you can see in the big picture we're very tiny. But
little pigs.
Tortured.
So we continue to pay a premium price to our farmers, and we continue to add more farmers all the time, and it keeps farmers in business, and they're not subject to the whims of the commodity market.
I'm always fascinated when I ask farming operations producers where their products go, like how far away from where they're created do they go? Where do your hogs, where does the pork end up?
It goes nationwide. Now, I know it's popular local, and just so you know, our farmers are all local somewhere. But we really can't. I can't really sell pigs to my neighbor that has pigs. You know, you have to identify your market. And the other important part of it is that, I mean, I had people interested in, you know, we'd love to get some pork chops. Well, I'm not raising pork chops. I'm raising pigs, and they come with all kinds of parts on them and so on. But you have to identify.
Fully equipped pigs.
Yes. So to identify the market, initially I knew that the West Coast, San Francisco, for example, had a high sort of food sensitivity. They were interested in the earlier days about how animals were raised and eating quality of the product and so on. So you know, and so we have to. I would say we're selling primarily or almost 100% within the United States, but it is a brand that's national.
Have you ever entertained the idea of sending your product overseas?
Well, if we get to the point where we can't sell everything we have here, yes, we would. But right now, our domestic market is more than we can supply. Not that we're not looking for more customers.
Now, the question always. The question I started with was, what are the policy issues or policy issue that troubles you the most?
Well, you know, I don't know if there's any particular thing that troubles me the most. The thing that I think that I've seen that I've been impressed with over the past few years, and Secretary Vilsack was on here yesterday, and there were a lot of programs that addressed the small and mid-sized farmer that weren't just for commodity, just the big commodity groups. And shortly after Secretary Vilsack, former governor of Iowa, or he was governor of Iowa, I met with him, and the thing that impressed me was that those of us that were in, I would say, kind of an alternative type of agriculture, we had a secretary that was willing to listen to us, and we had input on Farm Bill and things like that. So those are the that I guess the thing that could trouble me is that access doesn't continue.
Okay.
But it's important that it does.
I'm glad you brought up those two magic words, Farm Bill. One of my favorite topics.
Thank you.
We've been writing. We just started writing about it. I know people. The next Farm Bill doesn't come up until 2018, and a lot of times in the agriculture politics community, if you bring up the word Farm Bill, you see people, their shoulders kind of sink, and they take a deep breath and like, wow, I'm not ready for that. because the negotiations for the Farm Bill are always pretty tough. But we're starting to ramp up already for the next Farm Bill negotiations. So if you could change, George, I'll start with you. If you could change something about the Farm Bill, what would it be? But you can only change one thing.
Well, yeah, that would be to make sure that the prices that farmers receive actually internalized, included all the costs of producing that, so that when somebody bought a bushel of corn, they weren't able to buy it cheaper as feed than what it would cost a farmer that had a good rotation and took care of their hogs humanely, would actually have in that feed costing feeding their livestock. And that's the kind of farm program we had under the New Deal, but which has been dismantled since 1953. And the trade agreements that we've had ever since have intended to force a fence row to fence row type of agriculture on every farmer around the world, so that big livestock companies could buy their grain as cheap as possible. So we need parity. As one word, it would be parity.
Shepard, you're nodding your head.
Oh, I was asked on the first day of my job as the Jefferson County Agricultural Economic Development Officer. My brother said, I never thought you'd have a job that had the word officer associated with it. And one of the big commodity grain farmers, we have the biggest one we have in Jefferson County is 4,000 acres. And one of the guys came to me and he said, what's your analysis of the county agriculture? And I said, the whole thing is underwater except for subsidies. And he said, bingo.
You got it.
I mean, because it's not very much more complicated than that. And the ethanol input is just it's just exacerbating all of that. Again, we're driving to scale, as you say, fence row to fence row. That's, again, this driving to scale. And it's to the benefit of the processors, not to the benefit of the rural economies, not to the benefit of the farmers, especially not the family farmers. The optimal size for a family farm in the Mid-Atlantic, according to Dr. Hansen of the University of Maryland, is about 250 to 350 acres. You can't have a farm like that where we are, because you can't afford the combine, you can't afford the trucks, you can't afford all this other stuff. And the overcapitalization and the overemphasis on commodity production for distant markets that really don't care about you. Right now, with the price of corn and soybeans going down below the price of production, all these guys that I went to high school with, they're all going to go out of business. Or they're going to take on years of debt until the price goes up again. And again, that'll be manipulated by somebody else. Has nothing to do with them.
The last Farm Bill started to touch on organic products. It created a checkoff program, or it started the wheels rolling towards a checkoff program. There's a specialty crop program. Did it do enough for the organic industry? If not, what else needs to happen?
Sure. Well, I will say right now, it was very kind of Secretary Vilsack yesterday to talk about organic and to give kind words. I did appreciate that. The truth is that it's only 0.5% of the whole Farm Bill touches organic, so it's a very, very small amount of money relative to the entire Farm Bill amount. So I always am hopeful, obviously, that there's going to be more money put towards organic research and other things that we would find valuable in our community. You've mentioned the organic checkout program. It's stuck somewhere. So it's really not moving at this point. We would love to see some movement on it. And to be truthful, it's a rather controversial topic in our community. Farmers and checkoff programs have not always had the best of relationships. There's been, perceived mismanagement and whether it's really benefiting farmers or not. In this case, the organic checkoff program will not be entirely funded by farmers, but will be shared with others, processors, retailers, and others. But there's big question marks about, again, will this be beneficial to farmers in the end? So that's something that's waiting to be seen. But I will say again that in the meantime, we're finding other mechanisms to pursue the things that we find of interest. Within our co-op, we have a voluntary program where each farmer can choose to give 5 cents of every 100 pounds of milk we sell, which is how we get paid. And that goes into a fund called Farmers Advocating for Organics. And in that program, there's a committee of farmers who has complete autonomy to decide how that money is spent, which again is unheard of. And it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it adds up into several $100,000. Goes towards advocacy, goes towards on-farm research, goes towards farm succession and farm transition issues. And most of all is how do you get information into the hands of farmers that they're going to find useful. So, farm policy is wonderful, but if we wait for farm policy, often we won't actually get where we're going. But if we're willing to work outside of that, we can make some amazing progress. Thank you.
That's some applause. That's a good segue, because I know that on the telephone call we were talking about things that small farmers are doing to gain voice. Yeah. And a co-op is one of those things.
Yeah.
Were you part of your organization, your company, when you joined the co-op?
We became members when it came into Vermont. And, again, co-ops have had kind of a mixed history. Some farmers have had good experiences with co-ops. Some have not been as responsive to their membership. I give a lot of credit to the original 7 farmers who started Organic Valley to make it a place that truly is a cooperative of its members. And the other thing that helps us a lot is that our pricing for organic milk is not at all tied to conventional milk pricing. You'll hear, if you follow milk pricing at all, you can get paid $24 for every 100 pounds of milk 1 month, and you can get, it's been as low as $9 a hundredweight. So if you try to think, how do you even budget when your money is different every month? So cooperatives have been a really positive thing. For us, it's a way for us to market our product, to have a good marketing mechanism to do that, and to be reflective of the values that we share. And let's be frank, a 40-cow dairy is not going to have much of an impact in the marketplace, but 1,800 40-cow dairies make a lot of impact in the marketplace, and that's where we've really seen that benefit.
Okay. Ben, you don't have any experience with co-ops, right?
We have a little experience with co-ops. Nouse Foods Cooperative in our county is a grower-owned cooperative that makes such products as Lucky Leaf and Musselman's, and it's a really, it's the #1 employer of folks in our county. It's a main cog in our agricultural community, and it's a really vital part too, because as growers who deal with the environment every day, it's good to know you have that kind of price floor that, generally speaking, if things go haywire and the stuff you'd like to take to your farmers markets maybe isn't good enough to get to your farmers markets, that there's going to be an outlet for a secondary kind of quality of product. So, but yeah, I'd say that there's definitely room for more co-ops, and growing that I think is a big way to kind of, especially we had a conversation backstage a little bit about younger farmers, and even here in the Mid-Atlantic, we're seeing a lot of saturation in the marketplace, and I think it's a real opportunity to kind of pull smaller businesses together and cooperate. I just attended a barbecue this past Monday, a new food hub aggregator, Chesapeake Farm to Table, that we've been working with. Is doing great things in that avenue, and trying to pull resources and access restaurant chefs who can kind of buy from multiple different farms through one purchasing avenue. And models like that, I think, are a really great way to kind of streamline the supply chain and get food closer to the consumer a lot more effectively.
What are some other things that any of the panel members have seen or done, witnessed, that could help small farmers play in this game and be, in the market and compete?
We have a very active West Virginia aggregation and distribution group. But it faces precisely the kinds of problems here. You see most of the food hubs that have been around, and the USDA has done a bunch of analysis on food hubs. And the real problem is they are not profitable under $1 million in sales. You just can't make it. You'd be better off with $3 billion. And that requires a significant producer population. It's like you would face with your pigs. I mean, you have to have a certain number of pigs before you can build a slaughterhouse. And we've found a real problem with that. Most of the examples that we visited in the Mid-Atlantic are philanthropically supported. They're not freestanding businesses. One of the few examples I know of is the Tuscarora Organic Growers Association up in Pennsylvania, and they've been around for about 30 years. Not a huge business, but at least they're in the black, and they're not sucking down philanthropic money. So the real thing you run into there is, if you go up to Delaware, for instance, it's not a problem in Delaware because they've got an enormous grower population. Same with Eastern Shore of Maryland. But you get out into Appalachia, which we're on the edge of, and the density of production isn't sufficient to produce the volumes that are necessary to hire the regulatory and operational staff. I mean, that's the sad truth. There are some famous examples here in the Mid-Atlantic that are often discussed, none of which is actually profitable.
I think it's really important, too, we shouldn't assume that all young farmers getting started have the entire skill set that they need. When you look at, I've been told sometimes, oh, you're just farmers. Well, there is no such thing as just a farmer. Farmers have an enormous skill set, from knowing about soils and animal health and repairing equipment and managing a business and all those pieces that you have to be good at in order to succeed. So for people who grew up on farms, it really is a leg up. You do get some of that practical learning experience, working with your family, understanding how hard you have to work to do the job. And there's a lot of young people, fortunately, who are interested in farming. There's great mentorship programs, but even really is making sure that those young farmers have a great business plan, a solid market, and really have the skills that they need, and knowing that that's probably a combination of programs, nonprofits, mentors, other organizations working together to make sure that they're going to succeed once they do get going.
In a couple minutes, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. But one of the questions that Danielle asked or suggested asking was, what do you want to see from the next administration? What do you want to see from President Trump?
Oh, cut it out.
President Bernie Sanders.
Yay, Bernie.
We have two Bernie people up here.
We're from Vermont.
From
so
Vermont.
We have to say, yay, Bernie. Yay, Bernie.
My farm was actually down in the Intervale when Bernie was mayor.
Awesome. Well, can I just say from that perspective that not only as a proud Vermonter, but Bernie, I think, is the only presidential candidate that really has a true on-farm perspective of what farmers do. It was really sobering to watch some of the CNN town halls. There were some Republican candidates that were being asked questions from the audience, and several large dairy farmers from Wisconsin asked about labor issues. Clearly not a frame of reference that they really feel comfortable even talking about. So without that familiarity, I know that there are people who are obviously paying closer attention to agriculture, but it would be lovely to have more of a familiarity about what farm issues are so that we can have a better conversation.
And we also have a mutual friend
Yes.
who was an organic farmer with his vegetable farm right next to mine.
Yeah.
And he ran for the House,
Yeah.
got elected to the House, was in the House for a number of years and ended up as the chair of the House Agriculture Committee, ponytail and all.
And now he's running for lieutenant governor in Vermont.
And now he's a senator and he's running for lieutenant governor.
Yeah.
So, the proud Vermonter thing again. I mean, what can you do?
What about the rest of you? What do you want to see from the next administration, besides making them farmers?
Or farm literate. How about that?
Be a farm literate. We'll settle for that.
Who's appointed as next Secretary of Agriculture is critical.
Yeah.
And I think you want to have somebody that really understands the issues that we're talking about in the last 2 days and allows for a place at the table for organic and sustainable agriculture to really be part of the conversation. It's important to have that person in that place.
Do you feel like this USDA under Tom Vilsack is moving in that direction?
Absolutely. But that could all stop if we have the president that you proposed, but I don't know.
Which one?
I would point out that the fact that we had Kathleen Merrigan as the deputy secretary was a sign of progress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, how about we take some questions from the audience? I see a hand up over here. The person with the mic gets to choose.
One of the things I wanted to, about the Farm Bill is that one of the biggest subsidies is federal crop insurance, and some of the good things is that organic crops have been included in to be insured for their real value and so forth. But there's nothing really tied to federal crop insurance as far as conservation practices, this kind of thing, and I think that's really important. That should be part of the. I mean, if you're going to participate in the program, the taxpayer ought to get something for their money as well.
Not just the conservation title in the Farm Bill, but actually tied to the larger crop insurance.
Yeah. What are you doing on your land? Are you hanging your disc over the river bank and letting? And I've seen this done, so I know it happens. But if you're carrying out good conservation, George alluded to this a little bit earlier. you need to do something to participate.
Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Okay. Oh, sorry. My name's Karen. I'm with Moms Rising. And I want to start by saying I live on the border of Cumberland and Adams County. So, yeah, small world. And thank you all for the very important work you're doing in our food system.
We have 3 people here.
It's
Yeah.
4.
4. There we go.
My goodness.
I'm also a master gardener in Cumberland County. So, yeah, I really appreciate the work that you all do. And just to connect a few threads, I'd love to know if you have any experience with Farm to School. And I see that as a really important, Moms Rising does a lot of work around healthy schools and communities, and it's such an important way to help our kids know where food comes from, to inspire school gardens and more. So we'd love to know if you're doing anything around Farm to School and what we can do to support Farm to School and get more funding so we can see even more of it across the country.
Absolutely. Oh.
Regina, you want to take it?
I'll just say we had a very personal experience with Farm to School when my daughter, who's 18 now, was quite young. At that point, the food service director at our small school, we live in a town of 5,000 people, caught me one day when I was down at the school, and she said, "We just had a recall of the hamburger that we got through the USDA program. I had to throw it away. I don't ever want to do that again. So what can I buy from you?" Because she said, "We know you." So we talked a bit. We're dairy farmers. A lot of times when cows are at the end of their productive life, they go into the meat stream. And so I said, well, we could provide you with an older cow. And we also grow some corn and some vegetables. And so we made a very informal arrangement. And so as it turned out, the cow Shirley was also the principal's name, Shirley. So it was the kids just thought that was hilarious. But we managed to help them get that meat into their food service. We grew sweet corn, and we had a parents processing day where the parents we can't can things at the school, but you can freeze.
So wait a minute, when they were talking about slaughtering Shirley, which Shirley were they talking about?
The cow.
Okay.
Yeah. So we froze sweet corn. And the beautiful part is when you give kids good food to eat, they eat it. So that was a really fun part. And so from that time, that same food service director and a number of the teachers have integrated not only bringing fresh food into the cafeteria from local farms, but each classroom actually had a partner farm in our community. So the classrooms would come out and visit their farmers. The farmers would come into the classroom. They'd build relationships. They'd write letters to each other. So just building that appreciation for local farms and the part that they play, I think, really strengthens the relationship all through the community. And Farm to School is vital, because if kids get excited about eating good food, then that's going to stretch into adulthood.
Hi, my name is Rose. I'm a student at Cornell University, and I'm looking at food policy. So my question was actually already touched on a little bit. I wonder if any of you are part of the federal crop insurance program, and also what are your opinions on this program? What do you believe are the positive and negative outcomes?
I think we kind of touched on that already, but are any of you getting any kind of crop insurance?
Well, I have a young man farming my farm, and he's an organic farmer. I wanted to tell that over the past few years, all of my farm has been converted to organic production, and he participates in federal crop insurance. And last year it was very wet in the spring and got crops in late, and some of them not harvested in the fall, and it saved him this past year.
I think people were very critical of the crop insurance program and how the money's been used, but farmers do need some kind of a safety net, because it's not a business that can be reliable from year to year, because you have weather issues, you have price issues, you have all these things that happen that they have no control over. And if you take away the safety net, I think it discourages people from getting into the business. Yeah. It's hard to get bank loans. You can't really do a lot.
Yeah, I can add to that conversation a little bit. Again, going back to my earlier comments about things that distract me and my father and my uncle from the business of farming, which is what we love to do. My father's kind of the crop insurance guy, so I don't mean to speak in his behalf. He's the expert, and I kind of glean what I can from it. But this year is a good example. We are signed up for crop insurance, and we had a temperature of 19 degrees in full bloom. So that's we don't know exactly how bad our crop was damaged, but this is what I would argue would be a classic example of why crop insurance is important.
In 1 year's time, you could be taken out of business.
Yes, exactly. We only get one flower per year. If that flower dies, we don't have a chance to make a profit. or keep our business going until the following year when it blooms again, at which point we could be hit with the very same thing. So, you know, it's just like, and I would argue in the case of what we're encountering this year that, you know, and certainly I've seen some abuse of crop insurance programs even in our local area, but I think that would be in my opinion, a classic example of why these programs are in place. And I mean, it would be the same as any other insurance you would buy. And in the case of some kind of catastrophic disaster, you have some way to make sure that your business is viable for another year.
Was the Farm Bill not born from the Dust Bowl, of like the Depression era?
Not the ones
Farmers
we
were
have.
wiped out all across the country.
Make that point louder, George.
Yeah, I said not the ones that we have. They have nothing to do with the New Deal farm programs.
Another classic one that's not happening right now, but it happened in 2010, was the impact of brown marmorated stink bug, which wiped out 90% of the fruit production in the Mid-Atlantic. Fortunately, they don't overwinter in Vermont. So,
wow.
But the epicenter of that was right in the fruit-growing region of the Cumberland Valley down into the Shenandoah Valley.
Could I
George, you
say
obviously
something
have
about,
some
I'd like to
things.
explain something about crop insurance. Every farmer would like to be insured against a catastrophe. But when you have the margins so low, it's going to be hard for a farmer to buy insurance if it wasn't subsidized, okay? So they subsidize it. But what you got to realize with all of our farm policy, the intention is to keep the system operating. So therefore, if you left it up to farmers with their small margins, a lot of them would not buy crop insurance no matter how damn important it was. And then what you do is you get a threat to the system. You would have, like if there was a big drought in the Midwest or wherever, or on the Atlantic coast, you would have thousands of farmers going broke. Well, this system wouldn't stand that. You know, you can't like put farmers back into business after they've just gone broke by the thousands. So therefore, the system is what insurance actually is intended for, okay? And subsidies are to make sure that enough farmers buy insurance so that there's not a threat to the system.
So it's the American Health Care Act for farmers.
I don't know. That's above my head. I'm sorry.
Obama farm?
I couldn't come up with it quick enough. I tried.
Yes, Mel Coleman, you had made one mention of ethanol. I'd like to ask the question, what impact does ethanol have on sustainable agriculture and food production?
Well, I tried to speak to that very, very briefly because my mentor believes that ethanol is the poison pill of American agriculture. And the way I approach that, I'm not as knowledgeable as he is. He's in his 80s, been involved in farming for 60-some years. But from my perspective, it's just one more of these things driving scale. And driving scale is just, it's terrible. I mean, we don't need all of this stuff. I would rather, no, admittedly, I drive a diesel car, so I'm not free from criticism here. But I think that whenever you ramp up that kind of production, that's the fence row to fence row. Because the ethanol market provides the opportunity to take land that shouldn't be in production and put it into production at a subsidized cost. And it's the subsidies, again, as George would say, it's really the subsidies that distort this whole system. If we had a free market, it would be a great thing.
Wait, now that's where I disagree with you. Because no farmer has any choice but to plant fence row to fence row, whether there's ethanol or not.
Well, at this point, okay. I agree with you.
No.
I agree
so
with you.
In the vast corn belt, people are going to plant lots of corn and lots of soybeans, regardless of weather, whatever. And so corn gets used to create ethanol. It's used to create wallboard and everything else you can think of because it's so damn cheap. Now they're going to use it to make chemicals, biochemicals, okay, solvents and detergents. Okay, now, but the weird thing about it is they've set up ethanol plants in places in this country where corn had become almost a non-existent crop. But they've then contracted with farmers around that ethanol plant to raise corn just for that ethanol plant. So that's the real story about ethanol. Otherwise, we'd be producing so much corn regardless. Farmers don't produce corn because of subsidies. It's the only thing there is to raise. Corn and soybeans, wheat, they're all storable commodities. You can store them. There are about 250 million acres of program crops. Those are storable commodities. Okay, you can store them. There's only about 12 million acres of fruits and vegetables in the United States. Now, if you took 10% of the program crops and put them in fruits and vegetables, the acres of fruits and vegetables would triple. Okay, so now if you did that, all the fruits and vegetable farmers would go broke, and there'd be a hell of a lot of fruits and vegetables rot in the field. So the fact of the matter is, farmers raise storable crops, commodities, because there's really no other choice. And it just so happens we can produce so much corn and make it so damn cheap that there are scientists everywhere figuring out how are we going to use this, you know, protein, carbohydrates, and oil.
There's another question in the audience, but I want to ask George a question. George, do you see a storm coming that's going to break this system at any point? I mean, we have all kinds of stresses and issues. Glyphosate's being questioned right now, neonics. There is, you know, the low prices of crops. What's going to actually, what might change the system? If we can't change it ourselves, what might actually lead to drought? I mean, what's coming?
First of all, I mean, I believe in democracy, and so it would take an informed electorate, which unfortunately in this country with corporate media is scared, you know, very scarce.
Wait a minute, am I part of corporate media?
Yeah, so
You're just a very
I'm not
small
too sure, but I know that as far as print media goes, usually when I read an article, I know less after I read the article than when I started. So, you know, if you inform the American people what was actually going on, what the real cost of the environment, what the real cost of the economic opportunity for their children down the road was, and the cost to our health, et cetera, yeah, there'd be a revolution. But we don't get, people turn on TV or whatever, they don't get that story.
All right. I'm liberal media, now I'm corporate media, so.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm from New Mexico, and one of my jobs there is working with young farmers. And I hope maybe you could, to me, one of the biggest challenges to a future of resilient agriculture is where are the people who are going to do it coming from? And I wondered if you could just speak to what role does policy play in encouraging young people to choose a career in agriculture?
I can speak to that a little bit. I have some friends in an organization, and I've worked with them a little bit, the NYFC, that's taken one initiative to kind of help solve that problem with the idea of making farming a public service and offering loan forgiveness for young and beginning farmers. And I think that, you know, that is at least a policy that could affect bringing some more young people back to agriculture. But as was discussed a little bit earlier, you know, it's not only the economics, but it's the education that's really needed, and land access. I mean, I'm very self-conscious as a multi-generational family farmer that, you know, I was very fortunate to come back to a you know, vibrant, growing farm, and so I'm always thinking about ways to help my peers and folks that I know from college and from my community to get started, and it's incredibly difficult. But yeah, that's I would suggest that as possibly one alternative. But you know, the statistics are out there. I think it's 67 maybe is the average age of someone in production agriculture in the United States. It's pretty, you know, there needs to be younger people in agriculture, and it's you know, it can't, the willingness has to be matched with all the things we're talking about: the economics, access to capital, access to land, and the education of how to be successful at it. Because at the end of the day, if they're not successful on their farms, then we're back to where we started.
I would add too that I think people have to see opportunity in farming. That if you think that you're not going to be paid enough, that you're going to work really hard, that you're not going to make a living, it's going to be hard on your family, that's something that's going to be very hard for most young people to say, yeah, I want to do that. And the other dynamic we see at play, we live next door to a technical college that has a 2-year agricultural program. So you get these 19-year-olds who are done with their program, and they say, we want to farm. Well, I don't know if 19-year-olds are ready to purchase a farm and take on the responsibility of what that means. But what do you do with a 19-year-old who wants to farm until their whatever age is the right time for that? So it would be great if there were programs or mentorships or increasing opportunities so that they could say, okay, for the next 4 years, you're going to work really hard with a farmer who's experienced. You're going to learn. You're going to make sure that this is what you really want. And then, if that's still where you are, then there's going to be programs out there to help you get going.
At least they're not becoming journalists.
Oh, now.
That's my training. And I became a farmer. But the point I wanted to make, because we were, all of the speakers were, had to do a stand-up in the hall in front of a banner. And one of the questions that was asked was, what do you think the importance of a meeting like this is? And my take-home answer was to connect people of his age with people of our age. Because, well,
you're putting me in that group?
Yes, you're one of the young ones. You're one of the young ones. No, because seriously, the fact is it's the young people that are going to do this. And yet the young people need to be connected to the people who have done this.
Right.
So that there is a transmission of this knowledge between the generations. I mean, it's a critical issue. Because otherwise, you're not going to get these people to the point where they can actually do it.
Right.
And so, and there are, Vermont Technical College is only one. There's Green Mountain College where I teach. There's Shepherd University where I've taught. There's Michigan State, which is graduating an excellent number of vegetable people. Davis, Cornell, I mean, there are programs out there. But as you say, those people do not necessarily come out of those programs ready to hit the ground running. Yeah. They come out with the skills to be good employees for X number of years and maybe take over the farm. I mean, we have a 250-acre farm 70 miles from here. The guy's been in DuPont Circle for 20 years, and he unfortunately has a health problem. He's trying to find somebody to take over the farm. Of course, he's kind of a cantankerous little guy, and he won't allow any organic people. But I mean, this is a persistent problem that we face, and so I think it's really, really critical that conferences like this bring in the old people and the young people so that they have a chance to form these networks that will guarantee generational stability.
Absolutely.
Paul, you look like you have something to say.
Well, there's a National Young Farmers Coalition, and it's an organization that's grown very rapidly in the last just few years. And there's a lot of bright young people there, and they get together, and they probably have all the answers as to what those policy things would be. It's different from state to state. There's national and state policy and so on. I would suggest running them down.
Yeah, I would suggest that everybody push a pencil like every farmer has to do to see if they're actually going to make any money, and see, find out what farmers can raise, what they're going to sell it for, and then are you going to make any money? Because I remember going to I don't know what it was, some kind of a small farm type of demonstration thing, and they said, wow, we raised 2,000 pounds of vegetables. And everybody goes, wow. Okay, well, if you think about it, at $5 a pound, that's $10,000. Okay, who's going to live on $10,000? So, I mean, you got to be realistic about the volume you have to raise, what kind of price you're going to get, and how in the world are you really going to do it,
I think I saw something recently, a statistic about farm families where most farm families, the lion's share, the primary source of income is not from the farm. It's from the other jobs that are held in that household.
Well, there's a couple of issues there, and correct me if I'm wrong, George, because you would know this. I know where we are, the commodity grain farmers all have excavating businesses because they have the equipment. Mm-hmm. And that's what they do in the off seasons. They do excavation. And the other thing about that I think is critical is if you don't have, I'd say at minimum, a $250,000 cash flow, you're not even coming close to making a living. And how to get that out of commodity grains is a real question. How to get that out even out of vegetables selling in DuPont market is a real question. And I know I went through this with mine. I ended up, the biggest I could get in my little town, which is even smaller than her town in Vermont, was $60,000 a year. That was I was doing really well in a town of 1,500 people to sell $60,000 worth of vegetables at retail, and my net was $3,000. And I got 2 kids in school. I mean,
how'd that work out?
I went into the seed business.
George, I'm looking over your shoulder, and there are flashing tweets that people are putting out, and there was one just a minute ago, and this is your fault, attacking the media. So you started something. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
My name is Daniel. I work with a company in Virginia called Foodways. We moved from Vermont 2 years ago. I ran a food hub out there in Montpelier through FoodWorks. You're probably familiar with it, Martin, Joseph.
Yes.
And speaking of food hubs, which is what I want you to talk about for a moment, Hardwick, Mad River Food Hub, you know, shared processing facilities, you know, how these are influencing the capacity and opportunity for farmers and food producers to really get out there and make a difference, and then Vermont Farm to Plate Network if you have a chance.
Would you like to go first or me?
Go for it.
Hardwick is one of the great examples because everyone here knows about the book, The Town That Food Made, okay? And it's always set up as this incredibly successful thing. The only thing that people don't realize is that it was all tried back in 1980 and it all failed. And then Vermont matured over the next 30 years, and so now it works. In other words, these things are culturally appropriate. Because I know all the original people from Hardwick. They're all my age. And they all went on to go do other things. And then the young people your age came in, and the culture was ready for it, and so it started to work. And I think this is George's comment, that you have to be realistic about this stuff. You have to put a pencil to paper. That's why I say no food hub under $1 million is going to work, and probably $3 million. And we've worked this all out in spreadsheets. I mean, that was my job. So I would say that, and you heard me say disparaging things about the food hubs of the Mid-Atlantic. You look at their books, okay, and see if any of them are making money. And Hardwick is an example of long-term maturation, and it's a great place, except that it's colder than hell. Know it well myself. Used to go there to get my firewood when I lived in Jericho. Minus 42 at my hometown.
Well, the timer's blinking at me, which tells me I've got to wrap things up. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you very much. Thanks to our panel. I really appreciate you guys sharing this today.